What is an oxalate?
Oxalate is a defense chemical. This is a defense that plants use to stop animals and insects from eating them. They release these oxalates. This can make oxalic acid. Some people have heard of that. You eat oxalate, that can actually turn into oxalic acid in your bloodstream.
Can you get rid of them through diet within the body? And how long would that take?
Get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant, right? Most of them will make you very sick or even kill you. And that's why that's why we call most plants on earth inedible, right? Correct. So it's edible, inedible. Why is it inedible? Well, because it has poisons. It has poisons that will kill you. Well, you know, people that smoke and drink, well, they don't die that day. Well, obviously smoking and drinking, well, that's not poison then, right? But that's the same argument they make about spinach, right? They say, well, spinach, I had a spinach salad the other day, I didn't die. Like, yeah, right. But you didn't die when you smoked a pack of cigarettes either.
Yeah, true.
You didn't die when you had a bottle of whiskey either. But over the years, this will build up the harm and the damage to your body. And we can deal with some of it, right? But we're eating more and more and more of this stuff, especially because people are saying you need to go plant-based. And so we're inundating ourselves with even more, and our bodies aren't being able to handle it very well. Oxalates are a good example of this. We can't really clear these things. We have a number of different ways, that people, when they've been poor and they haven't been able to access meat as much as like the more wealthy classes, they have figured out ways of using plants and detoxifying them a bit more, making them more bioavailable in their nutrient supply. And but not all things can be detoxified. So like oxalates, you can't really cook them out. You can't really detoxify these things.
What is an oxalate?
Oxalate is a defense chemical. This is a defense that plants use to stop animals and insects from eating them and deter them, or even from pathogens and fungus and things like that would be invasive and try to eat the plant. And so they release these oxalates that are toxic to other forms of life that are trying to eat them.
Right.
So this can make oxalic acid. Some people have heard of that.
I have, yes.
So that you eat oxalate, that can actually turn into oxalic acid in your bloodstream.
Yeah, okay.
And it's also it can chelate different minerals, right? So it binds to them. Basically, irreversibly, we can't really break that bond. So it will bind magnesium, calcium, things like that, strip that out of your system. And so that actually strip out of your bones, because you have to keep a level of calcium, a certain level of calcium in your serum. And so your oxalates are stripping those out. And then you have to pull from your bones, which is a huge store of calcium in your body, in order to replace and maintain your serum. So you can get osteopenic, osteoporotic, but that's decades down the line, right? So this is causing harm the whole time. What about 75% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones? And they say, oh, it's because too much calcium. No, it's too much oxalates, right?
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So, we make some oxalates as sort of a breakdown product of different things, but it's like 2 milligrams or something like that from breakdown of protein, amino acids, and collagen and things like that. Vitamin C, people who take an abundance of vitamin C, that can actually turn into oxalates as well. But then the majority of where we get this stuff is in the plants that we eat, because this is just a natural defense of the plant. So and we've known about the toxicity of oxalates in the medical literature for literally hundreds of years. And going into the 1990s and 2000s, there have been peer-reviewed publications of people going like, hey, we are not paying attention to oxalates as much as we should. This stuff is toxic. We really need to be aware of this. We're calling things, gout and things like that. In the 1990s, the head of, I believe it was the head of the Journal of the American Medical Association, published his own paper saying, hey, we're talking about gout as only being these uric acid crystals, because that's not gout. Gout actually has 5 different kinds of crystals that can form in your joints, one of them being oxalate crystals. Right. And so you can have oxalate toxicity that forms into gout, but we just go, oh, gout. And then we call it pseudo gout, just anything that's not uric acid, it has to be pseudo gout. So they've sort of changed the names on that. But that was something that has been well described, well documented, going back literally centuries, and even to the point that we know how much is basically too much. So if you get above 150 to 200 milligrams a day, that's sort of too much. That's sort of overloading your system. You're not really able to clear it that well.
Is that from the actual plant material itself? So 150 to 200 milligrams of plant material, or is that for the actual
ingesting the oxalates? Yeah.
Oxalates themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So
how much do they like normally take up in plant material?
Yeah, so it's different. Yeah, so some plants are quite low in oxalates.
Right.
Some don't. Not all plants use oxalates, but most have like a little bit, and some just have a small amount.
Is that like polyphenols and stuff? Like, is that what oxalates come from?
So oxalates are their own.
Their own complete different chemical.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's different kinds of oxalates, but like they're its own class.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
and so, but there are certain things that have very high oxalates. So, like sweet potato, I think like a cup of sweet potato has, a couple hundred milligrams.
Wow.
Spinach, a cup of spinach has about 600 milligrams, right? So this is why Liam Hemsworth put himself in the hospital with 3 weeks of green smoothies, spinach smoothies, just every morning, and he's just pounding these things down. He gave himself a massive kidney stone and obstruction. He had to get surgery to get this removed. And so he'd been, I think, plant-based for a while at that point, but then there's a certain period that he really ramped it up. And so there's the idea in the oxalate, coming from the oxalate researchers that do a lot of research in this, and I'm just repeating their work, is that you have this sort of background level of inundation. You're just sort of giving yourself just a bit more than your body can really handle, or maybe a lot more than your body can handle. And then all of a sudden you'll have a big burst of something like 3 weeks of just 3,000 milligrams of oxalates a day in your smoothies, and it just be okay, that's too much, and you get overloaded, and you get this toxicity. But it can cause deposition of these oxalate crystals in your body, in your tissue, and even in your brain, and you can get all sorts of different neurological issues because of that. And and it can deposit in different tissues as well. And then your body seems to try to sequester this. If it can't clear it out through your kidneys, it can start damaging your kidneys, but it can start sequestering this in cells in your tissue to try to just get it out of your system. And so it actually forms like actual crystals, and your body has to attack these things and break them down, and they can start forming these sort of in almost like they would with an infection or a foreign body or something like that, and like it was called a granuloma. So they would just have this body of defense cells sort of wrapped around this, trying to keep that away from the body. And so, even years after you stop eating oxalates, you can get these things dripping into your system and things like that. So it has a long-term effect. And so, yeah, it's pretty surprising. But there are these things, and there's plants make about 1 million different chemicals. Most of those are to defend themselves against attack.
We're talking one singular plant?
All of them. Yeah, all. That's
a fuck ton of chemicals.
Yeah, but each individual plant can, easily do over 100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, coffee has 150,000 different chemicals in it.
Is that a little kick?
Well, it's just something, just something I happen to know about. So, it just has all these things. So we worry about caffeine, but it has thousands of other things that could potentially be of an issue. And so, it's just something to think about. And so I was trying to say this and make this point that this is how plants defend themselves. And historically humans really avoided plants unless we had to eat them. We would eat meat. We were hunters for 3 million years. And then the last 20,000 years after the megafauna died off, we had to go to more hunter-gathering sort of things because we couldn't get like all the big, we couldn't get the big game animals that we were used to.
Especially here in Australia. Fuck all game.
Yeah.
Like none. We've got scrub bulls up north, and I'm pretty sure they're on the endangered list, and you can't touch them anyway.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah. And, and so if you, just here in Australia, if you look at the records from the early explorers, the European explorers that came here like in the 1600s, 1700s, and the missionaries that were here around the same time, there's books written about this, and I've read them. Every time I come across one, I always try to see if there's a chapter on the diet of the native Aborigines, and there generally is. And they just marvel at the fact that they're just eating meat. They only eat meat, and in different areas they were eating specific meat. Now they would say that they knew what plants to use medicinally, and they might use things they knew which plants they could eat safely to survive if they couldn't get meat. But all the accounts that I've seen were all very clear that they said when they had meat, they ate meat. They didn't eat anything else. And in some areas, like in Tasmania, they were actually even more specific. They only ate mollusks. And so they would go diving for abalone and things like that.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the European sailors, they would like say we even offered them like normal swimming fish, and they were like, yeah, no, thanks, we don't want it. Now
we don't want anything that moves.
Yeah, well, and they sort of speculated, is this because they didn't want any of it, or maybe they were just mistrustful of taking food from a stranger, sort of thing. But either way, what they noticed was that they were just eating mollusks. They were just eating the abalone and things like that, and they're quite specific for it.
Right.
Yeah.
So going back on the whole oxalates theory, well, it's not a theory anymore. I guess it's fact.
Yeah.
How can people... Two questions. Can you get rid of them through diet within the body? And how long would that take if that is a strategy?
Yeah. It's really the only way to get rid of it is with diet. You just have to start limiting or reducing the amount of oxalates you're eating. Now, I don't eat any oxalates because of the way I eat. I only eat meat. But, that's not necessarily something that everybody wants to do. And so, yes, but you do need to reduce the amount of oxalates that you're eating. Try to bring that down below 200 milligrams a day. Then your body can start healing its tissue, stop having to clear so much out of your kidneys that it's actually physically damaging your kidneys. Right. And then it can start, at that point, heal it. And then you can reduce it down from there. And then you'll start actually clearing it from your tissues. So there's a lady, Sally Norton, who wrote literally the book on oxalates, just came out last year. And it's called Toxic Superfoods, like all these superfoods that we talk about. That book. Yeah. So it's just showing that, hey, these superfoods, we call them superfoods, they're actually toxic. Yeah. And it's like oxalates are actually, and she put forward so much data and research. I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds of references. I think over 600 or 800 references to different studies and things like that. And so it's, and she goes through that, and she actually has a protocol in her book on how to sort of do this safely. And because if you go down to like no oxalates right away, your body will say, okay, great, we're going to start getting rid of these oxalates. They start sort of getting it out of your tissue, and you start clearing it out of your kidneys. But that can actually be too hard on your kidneys if you've battered your kidneys for years and years and years with all this oxalates and things like that. You need a bit of time to heal. And so what she recommends is sort of coming down gradually and sort of reducing, getting down to that point, maybe half your oxalate consumption, every week, and then get down to that 100 to 200 milligram range. Do that for a while, let your body heal. In that range, you're not going to be storing more oxalates, but you're also not going to be dumping a lot of oxalates, and so you can give your body a chance to heal. Yeah,
like an equilibrium kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like it.
And so you can heal at that point. And then once your kidneys are better and your body's better in other ways, then you can start reducing the oxalates down even more, and then your body's going to start flooding these things out. And it seems to happen in weird patterns. Like sometimes your body will just dump out like a lot more oxalates at certain times. It's hard to really tell how it's going to hit people. So there's this idea of oxalate dumping when people go into a very low oxalate diet, or even like just a full carnivore diet, which is a zero oxalate diet, that they can actually get worse oxalate symptoms. They'll notice like, yeah, actually I have these oxalate symptoms. They go on a carnivore diet, they feel amazing, they feel better. And then a few months into it, they go like, ooh, I'm getting all those oxalate symptoms again. And that's because their body's sort of dumping this stuff out. Now, I haven't noticed that myself. Or in my patients, I haven't noticed a huge number of those. I certainly have seen that in some people that, a year or two down the line, or even 6 months down the line, they're doing great, and they're like, wow, I'm having these problems. Sometimes there's other issues that we can sort of troubleshoot, and they get back on track and everything's fine. Right. And other times we do all the troubleshooting, we take care of all the basics, they're doing everything right, everything's going great, they're still having a problem, we go, okay, well, we need to think about oxalates, because oxalates the oxalate dumping, oxalate toxicity, it can affect any organ in your body. Right. And so it's very vague. And so, it's one of those things that I think that you sort of have to come to, you need to think about. It needs to be on your differential, but there are obviously other things that can cause these things too. So you knock those things out. Okay, it's none of those things. Great. Let's think of oxalates. And then, I've put a couple people on that protocol that Sally Norton recommends, and they got better.
Oh,
you know, a lot of the other ones we troubleshot, and it was something else, but that was in the back of my mind. What if this is oxalates? One thing that Sally said is that if someone's having like a high calcium diet, because calcium can actually help you get rid of oxalates, because the oxalates bind to the calcium and strip that out. So if you're taking in calcium supplements, or maybe having a lot of dairy or something like that, other things that contain a lot of calcium, that can actually cause more oxalates to start coming out and shedding.
Interesting. Because combined to the calcium.
Yeah.
So you can digestively get rid of them through taking in more calcium, but it would incur more issues.
It could, yeah, especially at the level of the kidney, right? Because that's where you're going to excrete it from.
Yes.
Right. And so she was saying that there's actually some people who, years after they went like on a carnivore diet, they started like taking in calcium, and all of a sudden, bang, they got these oxalate symptoms, and they got these kidney stones. Damn. And it's calcium oxalate stones.
Yeah,
right. And so that was, but it, not everyone gets that, but it's just something to think about. That, and she was saying, because I actually spoke to her the other day about this, but she was saying that, having some calcium that can help draw this stuff out.
Okay.
And so, but it can come at a bit too fast, and so you got to sort of see, but
come at some cost of feeling it coming out. Yeah.
But for some people, but not everybody. Not everybody's going to have like a detriment from that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting how the body can store something for so long and then react to it after the fact of the healing happening. Like, what I'm saying is you've stopped taking in these oxalates. Mm-hmm. And then they stay dormant for a period of time until you add calcium, mm-hmm. and then they start reacting, and that's just wild to me.
Yeah. Well, she thinks that might be why, people that go into a carnivore diet from like a plant-based diet, which is going to be very high oxalate diet, right. that they have a bit of a delay. Maybe they don't have as big of symptoms because there's not a huge amount of calcium in meat. If you're having dairy and things like that, then that's a different story. But some people that are just doing meat and water, maybe they're not noticing things. It could be years down the line, and then they start dumping a bit more and getting a bit more out, especially if they start adding in calcium or taking a calcium supplement or something like that. She said that she's seen that, even years down the line, and then they, can even test, and they have, more oxalates in their urine and things like that. It's very hard to test for oxalates, because it's a bit unreliable, and because it's not something that we've really thought of as a mainstream problem. This is known about. It's definitely known about in certain circles, but it's not one of the the thing, like the normal things that people would think about and look for. So we don't have very robust tests for it. I think it's probably more to do with the fact that people haven't necessarily thought it was as big of an issue as it is, and so hopefully we'll get better testing for that. But it is difficult to test for it, and also it can be sequestered in different tissues, and so it's just like what do you test and all that sort of stuff.